He commanded crowds like few figures before him. Once a preacher, he became something closer to a prophet, a voice capable of making America fear and believe at the same time. To the public, he was the dreamer, the nation's conscience, the saint of nonviolence. But away from the microphones, another truth existed. He was human. Extraordinarily gifted, weighed down by responsibility, charismatic, imperfect. He preached loyalty, yet craved closeness. He spoke endlessly of love, while leaving emotional damage in his wake. Around him were women who recognized both the legend and the man beneath it. And federal agents who listened carefully, hoping that his humanity might one day become evidence. The FBI labeled it surveillance. Believers called it sin. History would later call it complicated. So who was Martin Luther King Jr.? A man overwhelmed by temptation? Or a reflection of a nation desperate to punish its flawed heroes? He was only 26 when America first learned his name. Montgomery, Alabama. December 1955. A city where bus routes were divided by law, habit, and fear. When Rosa Parks refused to surrender her seat, a young pastor from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was chosen to speak. Martin Luther King Jr. never intended to become a symbol. His goal was simple: steady a frightened community. But when he stepped forward, calm, deliberate, unhurried, the room shifted. There was electricity in the silence. By the end of the night, he was no longer just a minister. He had become the voice of a movement. Fame arrived suddenly, like a storm system with no warning. Journalists crowded his doorstep. The phone rang well past midnight. Death threats piled up in the mail. Coretta tried to protect what little normalcy remained. But in 1956, a bomb ripped through their front porch. Their baby was inside the house. When King came home and saw the shattered remains, he didn't shout. He prayed. That restraint elevated him into legend. But legends are never allowed to rest. His life became a constant journey. Mass meetings in Montgomery. Conferences in Nashville. Fundraisers in Atlanta. He slept wherever churches could place him: spare bedrooms, borrowed parsonages, modest hotels in segregated neighborhoods. To supporters, he appeared composed and unbreakable. Inside, fatigue carved him hollow. In private letters, he described a tiredness that devours the spirit faster than the body. Coretta had married a preacher, not a national icon. She practiced her music alone in quiet rooms while her husband drifted deeper into public life. Their rare meals together were interrupted by phone calls and urgent strategy discussions. She never questioned his commitment to the cause, but she already understood the personal price. By 1958, Edgar Hoover's FBI had opened routine files on King, labeling him a rising Negro leader. Officially, the surveillance was political, focused on potential communist ties through advisor Stanley Levison. Yet the tone of the report suggested something else. One field note remarked on King's strong personal magnetism among female parishioners. Dry bureaucratic language, but it marked the beginning of an obsession. That fall, King traveled to New York to promote his first book, Stride Toward Freedom. Inside a Harlem department store, a disturbed woman stabbed him with a letter opener. The blade lodged dangerously close to his heart. Doctors warned that even a sneeze could kill him. The recovery left a mark. Visitors described him as peaceful, yet distant, as though part of him had already stepped beyond the world. He told Coretta that surviving the attack meant his life no longer fully belonged to himself. In 1959, he traveled to India to study Gandhi's philosophy firsthand. There, enormous crowds welcomed him like a returning prophet. Journalists documented every movement. The reverence felt foreign. It also widened the emotional distance between husband and wife. Coretta wrote that he prayed longer, slept less, and carried solitude within him. When they returned to Atlanta, the family moved into a larger home, but privacy vanished entirely. Meetings consumed every hour. Letters arrived by the thousands. He confessed to Ralph Abernathy that leadership felt like living in a hotel with no checkout. Long drives between speaking engagements became confessional spaces. Abernathy later recalled King speaking openly about loneliness, not as complaint, but as a quiet ache. "The crowds give you strength," he said, "but they steal your peace." There is no evidence he crossed moral boundaries in these early years. Still, the emotional pattern was firmly in place. Public elevation, private isolation, relentless pressure. Wherever he went, admirers followed. Many were women who sensed both safety and intensity in him. A rare figure who made faith feel intimate, almost romantic. By 1960, FBI files expanded again. Hoover's analysts identified King as a potential moral vulnerability. To them, that meant leverage. For now, they listened quietly. Wiretaps authorized through Levison's phone line. Atlanta agents cross-referencing reports. They heard sermons, planning sessions, prayers. Nothing scandalous. But enough to intrude into the most personal corners of another man's life. By the end of that year, Martin Luther King Jr. was 31 years old. A father of two. And the spiritual leader of a national cause. To the public, he appeared immovable. To himself, he was split, between the saint America demanded and the man he still remained. That was the crossing point. The moral force lifting him upward and the human longing pulling him down were already in motion, waiting for history to smash them together. By 1961, the Montgomery boycott was part of the past, but King was still living inside its echo. He had become a moral institution, summoned from state to state to legitimize every new protest with his presence. Crowds filled airports. News vans followed his car. Church women reached for his hand as though touching it might steady their own fear. He responded with practiced grace, yet those closest to him saw the cost. He slept less than 4 hours a night, skipped meals, and carried the hollow exhaustion of a soldier who never leaves the front line. Coretta remained in Atlanta, holding the household together. That year, their letters sounded less like love letters and more like diplomatic cables, flight schedules, itineraries, requests for clean clothes. She was raising 2 small children alone while reading headlines about her husband's arrests and death threats. She believed deeply in his mission, yet sensed that history was quietly replacing marriage as his first loyalty. The FBI's attention intensified when the Kennedy administration entered the White House. Under pressure from Hoover, Robert Kennedy approved limited wiretaps in October 1961, officially to monitor communist influence among King's associates, unofficially to keep King himself under watch. Listening posts were established in New York and Atlanta. Agents reported long nights of phone calls, laughter, and what they labeled unstructured social interaction. Nothing criminal, but the moral tone of the reports had begun to shift. That same year, King's organization expanded rapidly. Workshops multiplied. Strategy meetings filled the calendar. Travel blurred into a constant cycle of cities and crises. The movement depended on a tight inner circle that followed him everywhere. Among them was Dorothy Cotton, 30 years old, educated, charismatic, newly appointed director of the Citizenship Education Program based at the Dorchester Center near Savannah. She trained activists to read, vote, and remain steady under arrest. King respected her intellect. She respected his endurance. Their paths crossed constantly, Birmingham one week, Atlanta the next, then Savannah for training sessions that stretched past midnight. Cotton later said, "We were living out of suitcases, moving from crisis to crisis." Within that rhythm, familiarity deepened. Late-night conversations unfolded in borrowed church offices, surrounded by empty coffee cups and discarded flyers. Witnesses recalled his voice softening around her, laughter replacing the measured cadence of sermons. One aide remarked that when King spoke with Dorothy, he sounded like himself again. By 1962, FBI analysts noticed her name appearing repeatedly on itineraries. Internal memos flagged her as a constant female presence. The Bureau couldn't prove intimacy, but repetition was enough. Agents logged sightings at the Dorchester Center, at SCLC retreats in Birmingham, and at conferences in Atlanta. Those vague entries became the groundwork for later claims that King's private and professional lives were intertwined. Inside the movement, no one openly speculated. Cotton's competence shielded her. She was too valuable to confront and too visible to discard. An unspoken rule prevailed: whatever existed between them stayed inside the work. Archived letters and travel records later preserved at Emory University reveal how closely their schedules aligned, months of shared routes and joint appearances. What actually passed between them remains partially hidden. King mentioned her only to praise her work. Decades later, Cotton neither confirmed nor denied anything, describing their bond as very close, very human. Those who knew them spoke of warmth, trust, and emotional intimacy beyond formality. The FBI, searching for moral leverage, labeled her a female companion, a term they applied to any woman who appeared more than once near him. For King, it wasn't scandal. It was relief. He was exhausted, revered, and unable to admit weakness. From the pulpit, he warned that, the higher the mountain, the deeper the valley beside it. In private, he told Abernathy that guilt had become his constant shadow. There are days, he said, when I feel God has loaned me to the world and forgotten to call me home. Victories brought no rest. Freedom rides, arrests, sit-ins, each success tightened his reliance on his closest aides. The inner circle became his only refuge from the miracle the public demanded he embodied at in the summer of 1963. As plans for the March on Washington solidified, the FBI's focus shifted decisively from ideology to morality. Hoover now referred to King as the most dangerous Negro in America. To him, charisma itself was subversion. Destroying King's moral authority became personal. Agents began cataloging every woman who appeared more than once at his events: names, hotel registers, banquet photographs. They didn't know who these women were or what they meant to him. Each was simply filed as potential leverage. What had begun as surveillance of a movement was now surveillance of a man. That August, King stood before the Lincoln Memorial and spoke of dreams that lifted a nation. 200,000 voices answered him. He seemed untouchable. But when the crowd faded and the microphones fell silent, he returned to his hotel room and stared across the Potomac until dawn. He had carried a nation's hope, and felt completely alone. By autumn 1963, Hoover's agents were convinced that proof would emerge somewhere. They had fragments, not evidence. But the directive was unmistakable: listen harder, dig deeper, expose the man beneath the halo. That pursuit was about to become war. By early 1964, King's fame reached unprecedented heights. At 35, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. His image appeared on postage stamps in African capitals. As the world prepared to sanctify him, the FBI prepared to dismantle him. Hoover's hatred became institutional. He told subordinates that King was morally corrupt and must be exposed before the nation. William Sullivan, his brilliant and ruthless deputy, accepted the mission. "We must mark him now," Sullivan wrote, "if we are to prevent him from misleading the country." That directive changed everything. Every FBI field office along King's travel routes, Atlanta, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, Miami, received authorization for full technical coverage. In simple terms, wiretaps and concealed microphones. Agents understood the message. Hoover's patience was exhausted. He no longer wanted proof of communism. He wanted proof of sin. By February, the Bureau was listening through the walls of the Willard Hotel in Washington, the Americana in New York, and the Dinkler Plaza in Atlanta. In those rooms, King believed he was finally unobserved. He was mistaken. Microphones captured laughter, idle conversation, fragments of hymns, long silences, and the soft crackle of records spinning on portable turntables. To an ordinary ear, it was meaningless noise. To Hoover, it was treasure. He ordered analysts to isolate female voices, transcribe partial phrases, and infer context. If King said, "She's tired," the report read, "Female companion resting." If a woman's voice drifted faintly into the background, it became unidentified female, possibly intimate. Inference replaced evidence. This was the year King's orbit expanded beyond Dorothy Cotton. She remained a constant presence. Her work at Dorchester never slowed, but his travel introduced him to new political and social circles, Washington lawmakers, New York activists, Los Angeles donors. Among them was Georgia Davis Powers, a Kentucky politician and civil rights organizer. They met at a Louisville rally in early 1964, both already recognized figures. Powers was the first black woman elected to the Kentucky State Senate. Sharp, confident, and impossible to intimidate, King admired her courage. She admired his steadiness. Their friendship deepened through campaign efforts, extended phone calls, and shared train rides to conferences. Decades later, Powers wrote that intimacy grew not from glamour, but from exhaustion and trust. "He wasn't the man on the podium then," she said. "He was the man who doubted, who needed someone to talk to." Her memoir later confirmed the relationship, making it one of the few affairs historians accept with confidence. The FBI did not wait for confirmation. By mid-1964, Powers' name was already in the file, alongside several others, known and unknown. Every instance of her traveling with King, whether legitimate SCLC business or social, was logged as personal association. At the same time, the Bureau began receiving intelligence from an informant in Los Angeles. The source belonged to the city's black professional elite and attended high-profile fundraisers where King mingled with doctors, lawyers, and celebrities. He reported that King was spending increasing time with Dolores Evans, the wife of a respected dentist. Evans was elegant, poised, active in church circles, and in her early 30s. According to the informant, she and King had first met at a Beverly Hills fundraiser 2 years earlier. Their correspondence, he claimed, resumed during King's frequent visits to California. No letters survive. No witness ever directly confirmed their meetings. Still, the informant's allegation, that Evans gave birth to a daughter whose paternity her husband privately questioned, became Hoover's fixation. He underlined the claim in red pencil and wrote, "Verify. If true, destroy subject." It was never verified. Meanwhile, King's Washington visits generated another shadow in the records. A woman identified only in fragments, the Washington regular, as the FBI called her. She appeared to work as an administrative assistant in a congressional office sympathetic to civil rights. Her name surfaced repeatedly in hotel logs matching King's visits to the Capitol between 1963 and 1965. The Bureau never captured her voice on tape. Her presence alone was enough to produce pages of insinuation. To this day, no historian has conclusively identified her. By the summer of 1964, FBI memoranda no longer pretended to concern national security, they were psychological indictments disguised as intelligence reports. William Sullivan wrote, "King's sexual aberrations constitute a national weakness. He is unfit to lead the Negro people. Exposure must occur before he receives further honors." The honor he meant was the Nobel Peace Prize. When King was officially named laureate in October, Hoover exploded. He publicly declared King the most notorious liar in the country. It was an unprecedented breach of protocol. Newspapers condemned the remark. Inside the Bureau, it was celebrated. Sullivan interpreted it as authorization to escalate once more. The new objective was explicit: break King's morale before he left for Oslo. Agents assembled a dossier titled Personal Activities, King, Martinell. Inside were hotel records, tape summaries, and a typed transcript of what they described as compromising sounds. Then came the letter. It was unsigned. Typed on plain white paper. Mailed from Miami to Atlanta in late November 1964. Inside the envelope was a reel-to-reel tape and a note that read, in part, "King, look into your heart. You know you are a complete fraud and a great liability to all of us Negroes." The letter was merciless. It accused him of betrayal, fraud, and moral rot. It claimed that white America had enabled his rise, the money, the honors, the applause, and that he was unworthy of all of it. "You know you are unfit," it said. There is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. The message set a deadline, 34 days. Chosen, the writer said, for a specific reason. There is only one way out, the letter warned. Take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is exposed to the nation. It dismissed his degrees, mocked his Nobel Prize, and ended with a final verdict. King, I repeat, you are done. Coretta received it first. She opened the envelope, played the enclosed tape, and listened to a collage of laughter, hotel sounds, and distorted voices. When Martin came home, she handed it to him without speaking. He listened once. He recognized the splicing immediately. This is Hoover, he said quietly. At that moment, surveillance became psychological warfare. That winter, as King traveled to Oslo to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, the FBI continued documenting every step. Their reports noted champagne toasts, official photographs, the Nobel lecture, and, chillingly, described the subject as calm, unaware of countermeasures. He was aware. He simply refused to let them see him react. The new year began with microphones already in place. By January 1965, covert devices had been installed in every hotel King was known to use: the Dinkler Plaza in Atlanta, the Americana in New York, the Willard in Washington, the Statler in Los Angeles. Weekly reports flooded William Sullivan's office, marked urgent even when they contained nothing but static. What mattered was not what they heard. It was the power of listening. King had long lived with danger. Threatening calls were routine. Anonymous letters arrived almost weekly. But knowing that his private life was being excavated for weakness produced a deeper fatigue, moral exhaustion. They've decided I can't be human, he told Abernathy. That winter, the Washington Regular resurfaced in FBI notes. She was never named, only described as a Negro woman employed in a federal office. Logs placed her at luncheons near Capitol Hill, at receptions following King's congressional testimony, and occasionally at the Willard Hotel. To the Bureau, every appearance meant guilt. To witnesses, it looked like friendship. She provided briefings on pending legislation and arranged introductions to sympathetic senators. Whether intimacy followed was never proven. Still, her presence in the records revealed something essential. In Washington, King's emotional life merged with political necessity. Every alliance carried two edges, useful by day, dangerous by night. In March 1965, he led the Selma to Montgomery marches. By April, he was back in Los Angeles, the city that blurred admiration and desire more than any other. There, he found something rare, moments that felt almost normal. Living rooms without strategy talk. Jazz instead of speeches. Children playing in quiet yards. Back east, Georgia Davis Powers remained close. Her letters mixed political counsel with warmth. She joined him at rallies in Louisville, Chicago, and eventually Memphis. Their closeness was visible enough that even rivals within the SCLC noticed. Georgia had his ear, Andrew Young later said, and sometimes his heart. The FBI made no distinctions. Cotton, Powers, Evans, unnamed others. All were folded into a growing file labeled personal conduct. Each new name gave Hoover another thread to pull. We will isolate King from the decent Negro community, he told aides. Late in 1965 came the most infamous allegation of all, the Willard Hotel entry. Washington was soaked in winter rain when King arrived for a ministers' conference and strategy meetings. He checked into the Willard, unaware that microphones were already hidden in the room. Technicians had installed them weeks earlier, running thin wires behind baseboards and tucking transmitters into vents. The assignment was logged simply, Room 409. Subject King. For several nights, the recordings revealed nothing unusual: sermons practiced aloud, chairs scraping, laughter, fragments of prayer, running water. Then came a reel dated March 8. An agent monitoring from a nearby room, identified only as T2, filed a handwritten note. It claimed that Reverend Logan Kearse engaged in sexual activity with an unidentified woman in King's presence, and that King observed, laughed, and made remarks encouraging the act. There was no transcript.no corroboration.no supporting detail, just a single paragraph, a marginal scrawl, elevated to federal truth. The tape itself was nearly unintelligible, static overwhelmed the sound. Street traffic hummed beneath everything, yet the allegation entered the file as fact, and once written, it could never be unwritten. Two other technicians later reviewed the same reel. Their written assessments were blunt, they could distinguish nothing beyond overlapping voices and laughter. But nuance vanished the moment the memo reached Edgar Hoover's desk. He underlined the phrase laughed and made remarks of a sexual nature. Then he stamped the file, sexual conduct, extreme. It was a classification typically reserved for blackmail cases involving foreign diplomats. Within 24 hours, the language hardened. Where the original note said looked on, a circulated summary now read observed and encouraged. In the next retelling, encouraged became participated. William Sullivan forwarded the memo to Hoover as definitive proof of King's moral corruption. Hoover told aides that the tape revealed the true nature of our so-called moral leader. No one outside the Bureau ever heard the recording. Inside headquarters, however, it spread like revelation. The story moved upward, to senior domestic intelligence officials, then unofficially to a White House liaison. By the time it reached the Attorney General's office, rumor had completely replaced evidence. The version now circulating claimed that King had witnessed an assault, laughed, and urged it on. No woman was identified. No transcript existed. No contemporary witness ever confirmed the scene, yet the Willard Hotel memo became the cornerstone of Hoover's private crusade. It marked the moment surveillance transformed into punishment. Inside the Bureau, agents spoke of it in hushed tones as the Washington incident. New recruits were told that King's alleged depravity justified every microphone, every wiretap, every intrusion yet to come. From that point forward, the FBI stopped pretending its campaign against King was about communism or national security. It was about humiliation. Hoover finally had what he wanted, a story so lurid that truth became irrelevant. A weapon made of rumor, capable of destroying a man's moral authority overnight. By 1966, the air around King felt heavier than ever. The marches were larger. The threats were louder. And the faces in the crowd seemed older each week. He had spent nearly a decade leading others toward freedom while quietly losing fragments of his own. The microphones he couldn't see were only part of the pressure. The greater weight came from within, the sense that every public victory exposed a private failure. Back in Atlanta, the phone calls with Lizzie Bell had never truly ended. She was steady, kind, almost painfully ordinary. A teacher's aide living in a small house on the west side, far from the roar of the movement. Their conversations were rarely political. She asked if he was eating enough. Talked about the weather. Reminded him to rest. To agents listening through copper wires, it sounded trivial. To King, it sounded like home. The Bureau logged every call anyway. Convinced her calm voice concealed something more, they opened a quiet inquiry. They interviewed neighbors. Traced her background. Sent a field agent to observe her church attendance. Nothing unusual surfaced. Subject is stable, non-political, and unremarkable, one report concluded. Hoover's office underlined the word unremarkable as though it were a puzzle. They wanted scandal, not normalcy. When none appeared, the file was quietly dropped. King never knew she had been watched at all. North of New York City, in Mount Vernon, another woman, the one whose name history still does not hold, faced a different intrusion. Her friends received polite visits from men claiming to be journalists checking details about the movement. They asked about dinners. Late-night meetings. Her relationship with King. She told no one how frightened she was. That winter, she wrote him a single letter. I believe in what you stand for, but the shadows are spreading. Be careful. King kept it folded inside his wallet for the rest of his life. That year, he carried more guilt than sleep. His public opposition to the Vietnam War had shattered his already fragile alliance with President Johnson. The White House stopped returning calls. Major donors froze funding. Inside the SCLC, tensions rose. Too many campaigns. Too little money. Too much exhaustion. Abernathy later said King looked like a man hearing music no one else could hear. Some nights, he sat alone in hotel rooms with the radio on, half expecting to hear his own voice spliced into one of Hoover's anonymous broadcasts. He told friends he no longer trusted phones, walls, or even silence. When the Chicago Freedom Movement began that summer, King saw it as salvation. A chance to prove that Northern racism could be confronted as directly as segregation in the South. Instead, it fractured him further. Chicago was brutal in ways Birmingham had never been. Here, hatred didn't shout, it struck. Bricks replaced insults. Housing marches ended with blood smeared across sidewalks. The Northern press turned sharply against him, calling him naive, reckless, even messianic. Every morning brought fresh hostility. Every night ended the same way, alone. At headquarters on West 66th Street, a woman from a local church began appearing quietly. She worked with the volunteer coordination team. Early 40s. Composed. Professional. The same age as the woman from Mount Vernon. She brought meals. Typed notes. Stayed late. Staff remembered her leaving after midnight, coat draped over her arm, never lingering. The FBI later reduced her presence to a sterile label, Chicago Associate, contact limited to hospitality services. Whether it was more than that will never be known. For King, even simple kindness felt like rescue. As Chicago wore him down, the leaks began. Reporters in Washington received anonymous envelopes hinting that a moral revelation about King was coming. Editors at the New York Times and Time magazine compared the phrasing and concluded the letters came from the same typewriter. Hoover's men were growing impatient. The Willard allegation and the anonymous tape had failed to destroy King publicly. So the Bureau turned to suggestion. They wanted the press to finish what they could not legally expose. Most editors refused. Ben Bradley of the Washington Post later admitted that everyone knew Hoover despised King, and that any unsigned moral dossier reeked of manipulation. Still, the poison spread quietly. At Washington dinner parties. In congressional cloakrooms. Through whispers too soft to print, but loud enough to stain reputations, King sensed it without understanding its source. Invitations dwindled. Calls from senators stopped. When he entered rooms, conversations slowed, just a fraction too late. "They're trying to turn the air itself against me," he told Abernathy. Later that year, he confided to Andrew Young that he no longer knew who was listening, or who was praying for him. "Every time I hear a phone click," he said, "I think it's God hanging up." It was half a joke. Half a confession. By early 1967, the strain showed in everything. His voice dropped an octave. His sermons lengthened into laments. He spoke more about death and redemption, less about victory. In private, he told Dorothy Cotton. "I've seen too much of man's cruelty to believe in simple goodness anymore." She reminded him that faith was meant for darkness. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. In Washington, Hoover was already moving forward. Controlled leaks to Southern newspapers. Moral briefings for friendly congressmen. Quiet dossiers circulated among allies inside the Johnson administration. What had begun as surveillance had become open character warfare. King pressed on. He still marched. Still preached. Still carried the hope of millions. But the man who once moved mountains was now being buried beneath paper, field reports, rumor sheets, whispered sins. The saint and the sinner were merging into one exhausted figure, pacing hotel corridors, knowing that even loneliness now had an audience. By the start of 1967, King's world had become a hall of mirrors. Victories no longer felt like liberation, only deferred costs. Cities that once welcomed him now greeted him with suspicion. Northern liberals called him divisive. Southern officials still called him dangerous. Inside the FBI, memos grew bolder. Surveillance became routine. Field offices were instructed to cultivate informants not just near King, but inside the SCLC itself. Secretaries. Drivers. Volunteers. They were approached quietly, offered protection or money. The directive was explicit. Document all feminine associations, frequency, duration, intimacy. Weekly reports from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington read less like intelligence and more like tabloids. Each woman's name, or absence of one, was framed as proof of moral instability. One report listed only first names, without context, as though rumor alone could substitute for fact. By spring, Hoover's office began leaking fragments of this gossip to selected congressmen, men he trusted to repeat it off the record. One evening in the Senate dining room, a Southern Democrat lifted his glass and said loudly enough for two journalists to hear, "Our saint has a taste for sin." The line spread exactly as intended. Within weeks, conservative Southern newspapers published vague editorials about a preacher whose sermons hide secret nights. No name was printed. None was needed. The damage was irreversible. King felt the isolation deepen. Old allies in the Johnson administration treated him as untouchable. Foundations withdrew funding. Inside the SCLC, younger staff whispered that the Bureau must have something devastating on him. Even those who loved him began to wonder what might surface next. In response, King turned outward again, toward poverty, war, and injustice beyond his own suffering. He launched the Poor People's Campaign, a plan to bring thousands of impoverished Americans to Washington in a mass, non-violent occupation. It was his most ambitious vision. And his most desperate. The FBI labeled it proof of radicalization. Inside King, exhaustion settled like a permanent ache. Dorothy Cotton later said he seemed haunted, as though every room carried an echo only he could hear. Georgia Davis Powers recalled moments when he would fall silent mid-conversation, eyes distant, hands trembling. "He was waiting for something," she said. And I think he already knew what it was. The Bureau no longer needed justification. They intercepted calls, spliced fragments into new internal montages. Fresh dossiers were prepared, stamped contingency, public release. One contained a rewritten version of the Willard memo, polished, formalized, framed like eyewitness testimony. Another outlined a media strategy for timed leaks should King's influence surge again. Meanwhile, his own body began to fail him. High blood pressure. Insomnia. Stress tremors. He stopped eating regularly. Lived on coffee. Lost weight. His suits could no longer hide that in his sermons, the rhythm slowed. Triumph gave way to destiny. That same year, he began speaking of death, not publicly, but as if quietly rehearsing it. To Ralph Abernathy, he said, "I don't think I'll see 40. To Dorothy Cotton, "They will kill me. But they will not kill the movement. To Coretta, "If they take me, promise you'll make them see I was still a man." In March 1968, to a close friend, he spoke without drama. "I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid to leave this work unfinished." The FBI recorded those words too. Inside the Bureau, each confession of fatigue became proof of guilt. A 1967 memo concluded, "Subject's increased fatalism indicates growing internal collapse under moral pressures." No one considered that the pressure might have been manufactured. That same month, Memphis sanitation workers went on strike after two black men were crushed to death inside a garbage truck. King recognized the moment instantly. Dignity. Labor. Justice. Everything his movement stood for was there. He went to Memphis against medical advice. Against Coretta's pleas. Against every warning pressed upon him. The FBI followed immediately. New observers were assigned to the Lorraine Motel. They logged his arrival, visitors to room 306, phone calls, meetings. They even noted his laughter with Ralph Abernathy and Jesse Jackson, as if joy itself were suspicious. On April 3, 1968, King stood in Mason Temple and delivered what would become his final sermon. "I've been to the mountaintop," he said, thunder rolling through exhaustion. "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you." Those who were there said it felt like a farewell disguised as prophecy. The next evening, at 6:01 p.m., King stepped onto the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He was speaking casually to Jesse Jackson below. A rifle cracked from across the street, the bullet entered his right cheek, shattered his jaw, lodged in his spine. He fell instantly. Ralph Abernathy rushed out and cradled him as blood spread across the concrete. Andrew Young shouted for help. Onlookers pointed toward a boarding house window across the street. Within hours, the news traveled the world. Martin Luther King Jr. was dead at 39. In Washington, Hoover was informed within minutes. His only recorded words that night: "This will quiet things down." The following morning, Hoover ordered King's entire personal file sealed under restricted access. The most damaging pages were removed to a private vault. The phrase personal conduct disappeared from summaries. What had been voyeurism was relabeled counterintelligence. Officially, the Bureau mourned. Unofficially, it exhaled. James Earl Ray fled the country under an alias but was captured 2 months later in London with multiple passports and $10,000 in cash. He pleaded guilty in 1969, then recanted, claiming manipulation by a mysterious man named Raoul. Conspiracy theories followed for decades. The government never reopened the case in earnest. For the FBI, the danger was gone. What remained was silence, the kind Hoover preferred. The microphone stopped humming. The report stopped coming. The man they had tried to destroy through humiliation became untouchable in death. Yet the files survived. Hundreds of boxes sealed under court order. Locked in the National Archives until 2027. Inside them, fragments of a human life, voices, letters, laughter, guilt, captured by men who mistook sin for leverage and privacy for evidence. When those boxes open, the truth will not be clean. It will breathe. It will accuse and absolve in equal measure. It will reveal not only the flaws of one man, but the lengths a government will go to punish a dreamer for being human. Coretta Scott King moved through the days after the assassination as if underwater. Cameras followed her as she led the march her husband had promised to finish. Black gloves. Measured steps. Conviction carried like a relic. Behind the grace was calculation. She understood Hoover might try one final strike, releasing scandal to cheapen sacrifice. A week later, she told a friend. They couldn't kill the man they wanted to destroy, so they killed the body instead. Within weeks, she began sealing his legacy. She founded the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. She insisted his name remain tied to peace, not rumor. The SCLC followed. So did the press. In death, sainthood hardened. The man who wrestled with sin became marble. Inside the FBI, Hoover watched with fury. A memo dated May 1968 read: "Public reaction following subject's death undermines Bureau objectives. Future strategy requires redirection toward preserving institutional credibility." Preserving institutional credibility marked the end of the war. The Bureau could not defeat martyrdom. In 1977, under pressure from the Church Committee, a federal judge ordered King's surveillance archive sealed for 50 years. Every tape. Every transcript. Every rumor. Locked away until 2027. Coretta's silence became armor. Asked on television about the Bureau's claims, she said only, "My husband believed in redemption." She refused to defend or deny. The saint and the sinner were inseparable, and the nation would not be allowed to choose only one. In the end, it was not Hoover who defined King. Not the microphones. Not the women. Not the whispers. It was the image of a man on a balcony, reaching toward the sky. He preached that love could redeem a nation. He never promised it would spare him. Behind sealed walls, the tapes still wait, humming softly with a life both divine and human. The echo of a man who walked the line between flesh and faith until the end. The gunshot in Memphis did not end the story. It buried it alive. James Earl Ray's capture clarified little. A drifter. An escaped convict. A man with no clear motive, but uncanny resources. Ballistics raised questions. Witnesses contradicted timelines. Security was inexplicably absent. In 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that while Ray fired the fatal shot, there was a likelihood of conspiracy. They named no one. The ambiguity remained, official enough to acknowledge, too dangerous to resolve. And so the story endures. Not as closure, but as a warning. Who was Raoul? Why did Ray have so much money? Why did the Bureau seal its files with such speed? Every answer opened another locked door. Coretta Scott King never accepted the lone gunman story. For decades, she demanded a new investigation. She insisted her husband was not killed by a single racist drifter, but by a network of power, terrified of what he was becoming. A movement uniting Black America, white labor, and the poor into one nonviolent force capable of shutting down Washington itself. Their fear wasn't of a riot, she once said. It was of a resurrection. Her family carried that belief forward. In 1999, a Memphis civil jury, in a case brought by the King family, ruled that James Earl Ray had been part of a broader conspiracy involving governmental agencies and others. The verdict barely made headlines. The Justice Department quietly dismissed it. But the doubt never disappeared. And always, there were the tapes, thousands of hours of recordings. Wiretaps. Hotel microphones. Informant calls. Preserved, but hidden. They were never about murder. They were about character. When the Church Committee attempted to subpoena the tapes in the 1970s, the FBI refused, citing national security. Even U.S. senators were denied access. One staffer later recalled being told privately, "If you heard what's on those tapes, you'd lose faith in government altogether." That was enough to end the questions. So what will 2027 bring? Will the world hear the voice of a man trapped in contradiction? Or a prophet destroyed by institutions that feared his truth? Will the tapes reveal transgression, or entrapment? Will the ghost of Edgar Hoover finally stand trial? Or will America look away once more, unwilling to face the machinery of its own sanctimony? The truth, when it arrives, will not rewrite King. It will expose the cost of sainthood in a nation that cannot forgive humanity. Somewhere, in a locked room beneath fluorescent light and cold steel, the reels still wait. Unlabeled. Unplayed. Humming softly with the sound of a man suspended between holiness and hunger, destiny and desire. In the end, perhaps the real question was never about his sins, or their tapes. It was about us. A nation that demanded perfection from its prophets, then punished them for being human. A nation that needed its heroes flawless, even when flawlessness was impossible. A nation that only worshipped them after breaking them.